My name is Loretta. I am 22 years old, and on my birthday, my own father sold my laptop to buy my younger sister a new phone. Then, he demanded that I pay her college tuition. Before I tell you exactly how they reacted when they found what I left sitting right in the middle of our kitchen table, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. I love seeing where all of you are tuning in from. Grab a cup of coffee or tea, get comfortable, because this is a long story, and I am going to tell you every single detail. To really understand why I did what I did, and why I walked away without shedding a single tear, you need to understand my family. You need to understand the house I grew up in. In our house, there were 2 daughters, but there was only one golden child. And let me tell you right now, it was not me. My younger sister, Darla, could do absolutely no wrong. She was the sun, the glowing center of our household, and I was just the dull, gray planet that was expected to orbit her quietly. I was expected to make sure I never cast a shadow on her shine, and most importantly, I was expected to do it without a single complaint. It was never just one massive event that showed me where I stood. It was 1,000 little cuts over 22 years. Our house was a beautiful 2-story colonial with white siding and dark green shutters. From the outside, we looked like the perfect American family. But inside, the lines were drawn very clearly. I remember the mornings before school. The kitchen always smelled like brewing coffee and burnt toast. My mother, a woman who always wore perfectly pressed slacks and kept her hair impeccably styled, would spend a full hour brushing Darla's hair. She would stand behind Darla at the kitchen island, carefully matching silk ribbons to Darla's dresses, smoothing out every single tangle with a soft brush. Darla would just sit there, drinking orange juice, humming to herself. Meanwhile, I would be scrambling to pack my own lunch. I would reach for a plain hair tie from the junk drawer, pull my hair back into a messy ponytail, and my mother would not even look in my direction. If I asked for help, she would just wave her hand and tell me to hurry up and make my own breakfast because I was older and needed to be independent. My father, Harlan, was a tall man with a booming voice. He worked as a regional manager for an insurance company. His salary was more than enough to provide a very comfortable life for us. But his affection was strictly conditional. I remember one evening when I was 14. Darla was 12. We were playing in the hallway, and Darla bumped into a small wooden table, knocking over an expensive glass vase. It shattered into 100 pieces on the hardwood floor. My father came rushing out of his home office. His face was red. But the moment he saw Darla crying, his entire demeanor changed. He lowered his voice, got down on his knees, and gently pulled her away from the glass. He told her it was okay, that it was just a vase, and asked if she was hurt. 3 days later, I accidentally left a water glass on the living room coffee table without using a coaster. My father found it. He called me downstairs and made me stand in the center of the living room for 20 minutes while he delivered a blistering lecture about respect, responsibility, and how I was careless with things that did not belong to me. I just stood there, looking at my shoes, nodding my head. Let me paint an even clearer picture for you. I remember my 16th birthday perfectly. I woke up that morning with a flutter in my stomach. Turning 16 is supposed to be a milestone. I thought that maybe, just maybe, today would be special. I put on my favorite blue sweater, brushed my hair carefully, and walked downstairs into the kitchen. My father was sitting at the oak dining table, drinking his black coffee and reading the morning newspaper. My mother was standing by the sink, wiping down the counters with a damp cloth. The house was quiet. There were no balloons tied to my chair. There was no cake sitting out on the counter. There was not even a wrapped box on the table. I walked over to the cabinet, pulled out a ceramic bowl, poured myself some plain cereal, and added milk. I sat down across from my father. I waited. I ate my cereal slowly, listening to the crunching sound, waiting for him to lower the newspaper and say happy birthday. Finally, he folded the paper, placed it on the table, looked at me over the rim of his reading glasses, and cleared his throat. My heart jumped. I thought he was going to reach into his pocket and hand me a card. Or maybe, I thought wildly, he was going to hand me the keys to the rusty old station wagon that had been sitting behind the garage for 2 years. Instead, he looked at me with a very serious expression. "Loretta," he said, his voice deep and formal. "You are 16 now. That means you are legally old enough to drive." I smiled, feeling a rush of excitement. "Yes, sir," I said. He did not smile back. He intertwined his fingers and rested them on the table. "Because you are of driving age, our household expenses are going to change. I sat down with our insurance agent yesterday. Adding a teenage driver to the policy is a significant financial burden. I am not going to pay for it." My smile faded. I set my spoon down in my bowl of cereal. He continued, talking to me like I was a bad investment rather than his daughter. "It is time you started looking for a weekend job. If you want to learn how to drive, and if you want to use the old station wagon, you will need to cover your own premiums. You need to learn the value of $1. That was it. That was my gift. A dose of harsh reality and a mandate to find work. My mother did not say a word. She just kept wiping the spotless counter. I looked down at my cereal. The milk had made it completely soggy. I swallowed the lump in my throat, nodded my head, and washed my bowl in the sink. I did not argue. I just accepted it. I spent the afternoon of my 16th birthday walking down Main Street, asking shop owners if they were hiring. Now, I want you to fast forward exactly 6 months. It was a crisp morning in October. It was Darla's 16th birthday. The energy in the house was completely different. I woke up at 6 in the morning because I could smell vanilla and buttercream filling the entire first floor. My mother had been awake since dawn, baking a massive, 3-tier chocolate cake. The dining room was decorated with silver and pink balloons. There was a banner hanging across the archway that said "Happy Sweet 16 Darla" in huge glittery letters. I was sitting on the living room sofa, lacing up my worn-out black sneakers. I had gotten a job at the local diner, and I had a morning shift. My uniform smelled permanently like stale grease and strong coffee. I was just finishing tying my shoelaces when my father walked down the stairs. He was practically vibrating with excitement. He walked into the kitchen, placed his hands over Darla's eyes, and laughed. "Come with me, princess," he said. "I have a surprise for you." My mother wiped her hands on her apron and followed them. I stood up and walked to the front doorway. I stood there, holding my stained work apron, and watched through the screen door. My father led Darla out to the front porch. He moved his hands away. Parked right there, right in the middle of our concrete driveway, was a brand new, silver sedan. It was washed, it was waxed, and it was gleaming in the morning sunlight. And sitting right on the hood was a massive, ridiculous red bow. Darla screamed. It was a high-pitched, piercing scream of pure joy. She jumped up and down, throwing her arms around my father's neck, and then hugging my mother. "Oh my gosh," she kept yelling. "I cannot believe it." They were all laughing. My father pulled a shiny set of keys from his pocket and dangled them in the air. Darla snatched them, ran to the car, and opened the door. She sat in the driver's seat, honking the horn, waving at our neighbors who were looking out their windows. I just stood there in the doorway. I felt completely invisible. My father had not mentioned a single word about car insurance premiums. He had not told her to find a weekend job. He just bought her a brand new car. I turned around, picked up my heavy backpack, and walked out the side door. I walked past the gleaming silver sedan, walked the 6 blocks to the bus stop, and went to work at the diner. I spent the next 8 hours pouring coffee for truck drivers and wiping down sticky tables, while my sister drove her new car around town with her friends. I was the workhorse. Darla was the princess. That was the dynamic, and it never changed. I worked 2 part-time jobs all through community college. I would wake up at 5 in the morning, take the bus to the diner, work until noon, go to my classes, and then in the evenings, I would take another bus to the shopping mall. I worked at a retail clothing store. My feet ached every single night from standing at the cash register and folding endless piles of jeans. I was studying graphic design. I loved it. It was my escape. But my old, clunky desktop computer was dying. I needed a reliable laptop for my design classes. I needed something that could handle the heavy software programs without crashing and deleting my work every 5 minutes. So, I saved. I kept a large glass jar under my bed. Every single night, I would come home from the diner and empty my pockets. I smoothed out the wrinkled $1 bills and $5 bills from my tips and dropped them into the jar. When I got my paycheck from the retail store, I would cash it and put 90% of it into the jar. I did not go out with friends. I did not buy new clothes. I wore the same 2 pairs of jeans for 3 years. It took me 8 long months of grinding exhaustion, but I finally saved up $1,450. I remember the day I bought it. I took the bus to the large electronics store on the highway. I walked in, carrying an envelope stuffed with cash. I found the salesperson, pointed to the sleek, silver laptop in the display case, and said I wanted to buy it. Counting out that money, placing those bills on the glass counter, was the proudest moment of my life. I had done it myself. I took the box home. I carried it into the house like it was made of fragile glass. I set it up on the kitchen table to install my design software. My parents walked into the kitchen carrying grocery bags. "Look," I said, pointing to the screen. "I finally bought it. I saved up enough money from the diner." I thought, foolishly, that maybe they would be proud. Maybe my father would pat me on the back and tell me I did a good job. My mother just glanced at it and started putting cans of soup into the pantry. "That is nice, Loretta," she said without turning around. "Please make sure you wipe the table down when you are finished." My father set his bags down, looked at the laptop, and nodded his head slowly. "Well," he said, his voice flat. "I am glad you are finally being fiscally responsible. It is good for you to learn how to buy your own tools." That was it. No congratulations. No pride. Just a cold acknowledgement that I was doing what I was supposed to do. 2 weeks later, Darla decided she was unhappy. She was sitting on the living room couch, scrolling through her phone, sighing loudly. My father was watching television, and my mother was reading a magazine. "What is wrong, sweetie?" my mother asked, setting her magazine down. Darla pouted. "My phone is so slow," she complained. "And the camera is terrible. All my friends have the newest iPhone. Their pictures look amazing, and mine look blurry. It is so embarrassing." She did not have a job. She did not have a glass jar under her bed. She had never worked a single day in her life. My father muted the television. He looked at Darla. "Which one do your friends have?" he asked. Darla told him the exact model. It was the most expensive one on the market. It cost over $8,000. My father reached into his back pocket, pulled out his leather wallet, and extracted his platinum credit card. "Bring your laptop in here, Darla," he said. "Go ahead and order it online. Pick out whatever color case you want, too." Darla squealed, jumped off the couch, and ran to get her computer. My mother just smiled and patted Darla's knee when she returned. No questions asked. No lectures about fiscal responsibility. No demands that she find a job at a diner. Just a blank check for the golden child. I stood in the hallway, watching the entire exchange, feeling a cold knot form in my stomach. The only person in the family who saw through all of this was my Aunt Marlene. She was my mother's younger sister, but they were complete opposites. Aunt Marlene lived in the city, worked as an independent real estate agent, and did not care about keeping up appearances. She always smelled like dried lavender and black tea. She had sharp, observant brown eyes that missed absolutely nothing. Aunt Marlene had gone through a very messy divorce a few years prior, followed by a bitter custody battle over her 2 dogs. She had learned the hard way that you have to protect yourself, because blood does not always mean loyalty. We had a small family gathering for my 18th birthday. It was supposed to be a dinner at our house. My mother ordered a cheap sheet cake from the grocery store. After the dinner plates were cleared, Aunt Marlene asked me to help her carry some dishes to the kitchen. Once we were alone in the hallway, away from the chatter in the dining room, she stopped me. She reached into her large, woven tote bag and pulled out a beautiful, thick, leather-bound journal. The leather was soft, a deep chocolate brown, and it had a small metal clasp. She placed it in my hands. It felt heavy and important. I looked at her, confused. "Thank you, Aunt Marlene," I said softly. "It is beautiful." She leaned in close, her eyes locking onto mine. She smelled strongly of lavender. She gave me a tight hug, her hands pressing firmly into my back. "Listen to me very carefully, Loretta," she whispered in my ear. "Your grandpa was an accountant. He was a smart man. When he died, and we had his funeral, the lawyer sat us down to talk about the inheritance. People change when money is involved. Your grandpa always told me one very important thing. He always said to keep your own ledger." I looked down at the blank, lined pages. I still did not understand. "A ledger for what?" I asked. She squeezed my shoulder. "No one can argue with the math, Loretta. People can twist their words. They can gaslight you. They can make you feel crazy. But numbers do not lie. Keep your receipts. Write it all down. Every dollar you spend on this house. Every dollar you give your father. Write it down." I did not know then how literally that piece of advice would save my life. But I trusted Aunt Marlene more than anyone else in the world. So, I took the journal. I hid it deep under my mattress, and I started writing things down. I did not use it as a diary. I did not write down my teenage angst or my sadness. I wrote down the numbers. I remember the first entry clearly. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I had just gotten home from my shift at the diner. I had $75 in cash from my tip sitting on my desk. My father walked into my room without knocking. He looked slightly embarrassed, shifting his weight from foot to foot. "Loretta," he said, avoiding my eyes. "I need to run to the hardware store for some supplies, and I need to get gas. My wallet is in my other jacket at the office. Can I borrow some cash?" I looked at my tip money. I looked at him. "Sure," I said. I handed him the $75. "Thank you," he said, taking the bills quickly. "I will pay you back on Friday when I get my salary deposited." Friday came and went. The weekend passed. Another week went by. The money never came back. He never mentioned it again. I pulled the leather journal out from under my mattress. I clicked my pen. I wrote the date. I wrote, "Dad borrowed $75 for gas and hardware store. Promised to pay back Friday. Did not pay." That was just the beginning. The entries started filling up the pages. There were the Sunday mornings. My mother would be drinking her tea in the living room. She would call me downstairs and hand me a list. "Loretta, please drive to the grocery store and pick up a few things for the week," she would say. The list would be 2 full pages long: milk, eggs, premium coffee, steaks, Darla's expensive organic snacks, laundry detergent, paper towels. I would drive to the store, push the heavy metal cart through the crowded aisles, load up the trunk, and stand at the checkout register. The cashier would scan all the items. The total would always be high. Usually around $350. I would look at my mother. She would act completely flustered, digging through her expensive leather purse. "Oh, no," she would say, sounding totally shocked. I must have left my checkbook on the kitchen counter. "Loretta, sweetie, can you just use your debit card?" I will transfer the money to your account as soon as we get home. I would pull out my debit card. The card linked to the account where I kept my diner tips and retail paychecks. I would swipe the card and pay for the family groceries. We would drive home. We would unpack the bags. She would never log into her computer. She would never transfer the money. If I asked her about it 2 days later, she would sigh dramatically. Loretta, really, she would say, looking offended. We provide a roof over your head. We pay for the electricity you use. Do not be so greedy. What started as an accident quickly became a monthly expectation. I became the backup bank account for their household expenses. And every single time I walked up to my room, pulled out the ledger, and wrote it down. Date. Amount. Reason. Excuse. I taped the long paper receipts directly onto the pages. I created a file folder for bank statements, highlighting the exact withdrawals. My room became a silent archive of their exploitation. Fast forward to the week of my 22nd birthday. I was in my final, brutal semester of college. The pressure was immense, crushing down on my chest every single day. I was spending 12 hours a day at the campus library. The air in the library was always stale, smelling like old paper, dust, and floor wax. I was exhausted. I had dark circles under my eyes that no amount of makeup could hide. My entire thesis, my final design projects, all my research, my entire portfolio was on that silver laptop. The laptop I bought with my own diner tips. I was scheduled to graduate in a month, and I was desperately hoping to land a full-time promotion at the small marketing firm where I had been interning. If I got that promotion, the salary would be enough for me to finally afford to move out and get my own tiny apartment. That laptop was not just a piece of metal and plastic. It was my lifeboat. It was my only way out of that house. It was a Tuesday afternoon. My 22nd birthday. I was sitting at a heavy wooden desk in the back corner of the library. I was deep into formatting a complicated document, staring at the screen until my eyes burned. My phone buzzed on the wooden desk. The sound vibrated against the wood, loud in the quiet library. I rubbed my tired eyes and looked at the screen. It was a text message from my dad. I picked up the phone and opened the message. It read, "Sold your laptop. Darla needs a new phone. Be grateful we still feed you." I read the words. I read them again. I blinked hard, thinking that my exhaustion was making me hallucinate. I thought maybe I was reading it wrong. But the letters stayed the same. Sold your laptop. It felt like a physical punch to my stomach. It stole all the air completely right out of my lungs. I gasped quietly, dropping the phone onto the desk. I just sat there in the hard wooden chair. My hands started to shake uncontrollably. My fingers felt numb. My heart was pounding so hard and so fast I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. He went into my room. He walked into my private space. He unplugged the machine that held my entire academic future. He took it, drove to a pawn shop or found a buyer online, and he sold it for quick cash. For Darla. So she could have another new phone. Before I could even process the absolute, burning rage bubbling up inside my chest, the phone buzzed a second time. Another text from Harlan. I picked up the phone with trembling fingers. I looked at the screen. Also, you will pay her tuition. $8,000 by Friday. I stared at the glowing letters. The library around me seemed to fade away. The sound of a student coughing a few tables over, the sound of pages turning, the hum of the fluorescent lights above me, it all became distant static. $8,000. He wanted me to empty my savings, the money I was keeping to move out, to pay for Darla's college tuition because they had probably spent her college fund on vacations and luxury cars. Something inside of me shifted. It was a physical sensation, like a heavy iron door slamming shut in my chest. The part of me that had been bent, stepped on, and bruised for 22 years did not just break. It turned to solid, impenetrable steel. The sadness I used to feel was entirely gone. The desperate, pathetic desire to be loved and accepted by them evaporated into thin air. I picked up the phone. My thumb hovered over the digital keyboard. I did not write a long paragraph. I did not ask him why he was doing this. I did not beg or plead. I typed back exactly 2 words. No chance. I hit send. His reply was instant. It popped up on the screen before I even had the chance to set the phone back down on the desk. Then get out. You are cut off. And just like that, it was over. 22 years of trying to be the good daughter, erased by 2 text messages. I sat in the library for another 5 minutes. I looked at the blank wall in front of me. I did not cry. My eyes were completely dry. I did not scream. I did not feel the need to call a friend and vent about how unfair life was. For the very first time in my entire life, there was absolutely no emotional chaos inside my head. There was no confusion. There was only a cold, sharp, brilliant clarity. It was the kind of clarity that only comes when you have been pushed way past your breaking point, when you are standing at the edge of the cliff, and you finally realize that there is nothing left to lose. I stood up. I calmly gathered my notebooks and my pens, placing them neatly into my tote bag. I pushed my chair in, walked out of the library, and walked across the campus parking lot to my car. I drove the familiar route back to the house. The sky above me was overcast, a dull, heavy gray, matching exactly how I felt on the inside. I pulled onto my street. I did not park in the driveway. I parked on the street, right against the curb. I unlocked the front door and walked inside. The house smelled like expensive candles and fresh laundry. I walked up the carpeted stairs. I walked right past Darla's room. Her door was cracked open about 2 inches. I could hear her giggling. She was sitting cross-legged on her plush white rug. She was unboxing a shiny new phone. I could hear the sound of the crisp plastic being peeled off the screen. She was completely oblivious. She had no idea that my entire future, my hard work, my lifeline, had been traded for her temporary luxury. I kept walking. I went into my own room. It was small, plain, and the desk by the window was completely empty where my laptop used to sit. The charger cord was dangling sadly off the edge of the wood. I walked over to my bed. I pulled a single, dark canvas duffel bag from underneath the frame. I unzipped it. I did not pack everything. I did not care about the clothes my mother had bought me on the clearance racks over the years. I packed only my absolute essentials. I packed my toothbrush, my hairbrush, a few changes of comfortable clothes, a pair of sturdy shoes. I opened my nightstand drawer and took out my passport, my social security card, and my birth certificate. I placed them carefully in a waterproof plastic bag inside the duffel. Then, I reached into the bottom drawer of my desk. I pulled out my backup hard drive. Thank goodness I had always backed up my thesis and design files on an external drive every single night. I wrapped the hard drive in a soft shirt and placed it in the bag. I zipped the duffel bag closed. I stood up. Then, I walked over to my closet. I reached all the way up to the top shelf, pushing past the heavy winter coats and the dusty boxes. I reached into the very back corner, my fingers feeling for the familiar shape. I pulled out a thick, brown accordion folder. It was incredibly heavy, bulging with paper. Inside that folder was Aunt Marlene's leather ledger. Inside was every single physical receipt I had kept for the last 4 years. Inside was every bank statement I had received in the mail, with bright yellow highlighter marking the exact transfers I made to my parents' checking accounts. Inside was every grocery bill I had covered, every pharmacy receipt, every single IOU I had ever made my father sign on a scrap piece of paper when I handed him cash from my tip jar. It was years of meticulous, undeniable records. It was a mountain of mathematical evidence. I slung the heavy canvas duffel bag over my right shoulder. I tucked the thick brown accordion folder under my left arm. I walked out of my bedroom. I did not look back. I did not feel nostalgic. I walked downstairs to the kitchen. The house was completely quiet, save for the faint sound of music coming from Darla's room upstairs. I walked over to the heavy oak kitchen table. It was the exact same table where my father had sat 6 years ago and told me to buy my own car insurance. It was the exact same table where he told me I was just being fiscally responsible for buying my own computer. I placed the thick brown folder squarely in the absolute center of the table. It landed with a heavy thud. I walked over to the kitchen drawer near the refrigerator. I opened it, pushed past the loose rubber bands and take-out menus, and pulled out a clean, black permanent marker. I walked back to the table. I took the cap off the marker. Right there, on the front cover of the brown folder, I wrote in large, block letters, "For Mom, Dad, and Darla." I put the cap back on the marker and tossed it onto the table next to the folder. I walked toward the back door. I turned the brass knob, stepped out onto the back porch, and pulled the door shut behind me. I closed it very softly, listening for the quiet click of the latch locking into place. I walked down the driveway to my car parked on the street. I opened the trunk, tossed my duffel bag inside, and got into the driver's seat. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. I did not look in the rearview mirror. I did not look back at the white colonial house with the dark green shutters. I drove for 3 miles until I reached a strip mall parking lot. I pulled into a spot, put the car in park, and picked up my phone. My first phone call was to Aunt Marlene. I listened to the phone ring. It rang once. It rang twice. She answered on the third ring. "Hello, Loretta," her voice came through the speaker, crisp and clear. "Aunt Marlene," I said. My voice was completely flat, devoid of any emotion. "I am leaving. Dad sold my laptop today. He told me to pay Darla's tuition, and when I said no, he told me I was cut off and to get out." There was silence on the other end of the line for exactly 3 seconds. I could hear her taking a breath. Her voice, when she spoke, was a soothing balm on a deep wound I did not even know was still bleeding inside of me. "You come here right now, Loretta," she said firmly. "Drive straight to my apartment." She asked no questions. She did not ask me what I did wrong to provoke them. She did not ask if there was a misunderstanding. She just told me to come home to her. I drove across town to her small, cozy apartment building. When I knocked on the wooden door, she opened it immediately. She did not say a word. She just reached out and pulled me into her arms. She held me in the narrow hallway for a very long time. She smelled strongly of dried lavender, black tea, and safety. I rested my chin on her shoulder and finally let out a long, shaky breath. After I put my duffel bag in her spare bedroom, I walked into her small living room. I sat down on her floral-patterned couch. My hands were still trembling slightly. Aunt Marlene walked into the kitchen and came back a few minutes later, handing me a large ceramic mug of hot peppermint tea. "Drink this," she said softly, sitting down in the armchair across from me. I took a sip. The hot liquid warmed my chest. I set the mug down on the coffee table. I reached into my bag and pulled out my spare, ancient laptop. It was a heavy, slow machine I kept strictly for emergencies, but it worked. I turned it on and connected to her wireless internet. I opened my email browser. I navigated to my drafts folder. I opened a pre-written email. It was an email I had drafted many months ago, late one night when I was feeling particularly hopeless. It was an email I kept saved for a day I truly, deeply hoped would never actually come to pass. It was addressed to my grandmother, Esther. She was my father's mother. She was the formidable, wealthy, no-nonsense matriarch of our entire family. She lived 2 states away in a massive house, but she held all the power. She controlled the family inheritance. She was the primary trustee of the family trusts that my grandfather had set up before his death. My father managed the day-to-day accounts, but grandmother Esther was the ultimate authority. If there was ever a dispute, she was the judge and the jury. I clicked the paperclip icon to attach a file. I selected a single, massive PDF file from my backup hard drive. It was a digitized, scanned copy of every single page in that brown accordion folder I had left sitting on the kitchen table. Every single page of the ledger. Every grocery receipt. Every highlighted bank statement showing the thousands of dollars moving from my account to my father's account. Every scrap of paper. My index finger hovered right over the mouse button, resting directly over the word send. My heart started beating fast again, drumming against my ribs. This was it. This was the absolute point of no return. Once I clicked this button, the family as I knew it would be blown to pieces. There would be no going back. There would be no holiday dinners, no pretending we were a happy family. The truth would be out in the open, raw and undeniable. I closed my eyes. I took a deep, shaky breath, smelling the peppermint tea rising from the mug. I thought about the laptop. I thought about the car with the red bow. I thought about the 20 minutes I stood in the living room being yelled at over a water glass. I opened my eyes, stared at the screen, and I clicked the mouse. The quiet little swoosh sound of the email leaving my outbox and hurtling through the internet felt like a massive cannon blast going off in the quiet apartment. I watched the screen as the email to my grandmother Esther was sent. The quiet little swoosh sound of the email leaving my outbox and hurtling through the internet felt like a massive cannon blast going off in the quiet apartment. My hands were finally steady. I closed the heavy lid of the old laptop. The screen went completely dark, reflecting my own face back at me. I looked different. The exhausted, beaten-down girl from the library was gone. If you have made it this far, please do me a favor, like the video and comment number 1 down below. It lets me know how awesome you are and shows that you are right here with me on this journey. Your support is a massive encouragement and truly motivates me. Drop that one so I can recognize you, and now, let us get back to my story. I slept in Aunt Marlene's spare bedroom that night. I slept for 10 straight hours. It was the deepest, most dreamless sleep I had experienced in my entire life. I did not toss and turn. I did not wake up in a cold sweat worrying about my thesis, my laptop, or the $8,000 my father demanded for Darla's tuition. When I woke up, the morning light was streaming through the sheer white curtains. I could smell bacon frying and fresh black coffee brewing in the kitchen. I put on my comfortable clothes, ran a brush through my hair, and walked out into the small living room. Aunt Marlene was standing by the stove, flipping eggs in a cast-iron skillet. She looked over her shoulder and smiled at me. She pointed to a ceramic mug sitting on the counter. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down at her small, round dining table. We did not even have the chance to start eating. At exactly 8:30 in the morning, Aunt Marlene's cell phone started ringing. It was sitting right on the table between us. The caller identification flashed brightly. It was my mother. Aunt Marlene looked at the phone. She looked at me. She did not rush to pick it up. She let it ring 3 times. Then, she calmly reached out, pressed the green button, and put the phone on speaker mode so we could both hear. She set it back down on the table. Marlene, my mother's voice came through the small speaker. She was not using her usual, polished, soft-speaking voice. She was screeching. She sounded completely hysterical, her words blending together in a panicked rush. Marlene, is Loretta with you? You have to tell me if she is there. Harlan is losing his mind. Everything is a complete disaster. Aunt Marlene took a slow sip of her coffee. Hello to you too, sister, she said calmly. What seems to be the problem this morning? My mother let out a loud, shuddering sob. The folder, she cried out. The brown folder on the kitchen table. Darla found it. Darla opened it while she was eating her breakfast. Marlene, it is awful. She saw everything. Harlan is screaming, Darla is locked in her bedroom crying, and I do not know what to do. You need to tell Loretta to come home right now and fix this. Aunt Marlene looked across the table at me. I simply shook my head from side to side. Loretta is not here to fix your messes anymore, Aunt Marlene said, her voice dropping to a cool, hard tone. She is an adult, and you pushed her entirely too far. I suggest you deal with the consequences of your own actions. Aunt Marlene reached forward and ended the call. She picked up her fork and started eating her eggs as if nothing had happened. I sat there, staring at the black screen of the phone. I did not need to hear the exact words to know exactly what was happening at that beautiful white colonial house. I could picture the entire scene perfectly in my mind. I knew exactly how the morning played out. Darla would have been the first one downstairs. She always woke up early on weekends to take pictures of her breakfast for her friends. She would have walked into the kitchen wearing her expensive silk pajamas. She would have seen that thick, heavy brown accordion folder sitting right in the absolute center of the oak table. Darla was incredibly nosy. She would never just ignore a mysterious package, especially one with her name written on it in bold black marker. She would have pulled out a chair, sat down, and unhooked the elastic band holding the folder closed. She would have opened it completely out of curiosity, expecting maybe a surprise gift, or maybe some travel documents for a family vacation. Instead, she would have seen the bank statements. She would have pulled out the thick stack of papers showing thousands and thousands of dollars transferred directly from my savings account to my parents' checking account. Right next to those statements, I had meticulously taped the receipts. She would have seen the receipt for her car repairs last summer, clearly paid for by my debit card. She would have seen the receipts for her extravagant shopping sprees at the mall, the ones my mother claimed she paid for. All of it, funded by the tip money I made carrying heavy trays at the diner. She would have seen the scraps of paper. The EIS my father signed when he needed $75 for gas. The long, 2-page grocery receipts for the premium coffee and steak she loved to eat, paid for by the sister she completely ignored. But I knew the bank statements were not the thing that made Darla lock herself in her bedroom and cry. I knew the exact document that broke the golden child's heart. The final blow, the secondary twist I had carefully placed at the very back of the folder, was a set of documents regarding her very own trust fund. When our grandfather died, the lawyers handled his estate and his inheritance. He was a very traditional man. He set up a specific college fund for both of us. The rules of the inheritance were very clear. The money was strictly for higher education. But my parents lived far beyond their means. My father's salary was high, but it was never enough for the luxury cars, the expensive clothes, and the country club memberships they desperately wanted to maintain. I had requested copies of the trust documents from the family lawyer, Mr. Wallace, a few months prior, claiming I needed them for a financial aid application for my final semester. Those documents showed the absolute, undeniable truth. It showed that after my parents had completely drained my college fund of $32,000, leaving me to work 2 jobs to survive, they had started chipping away at Darla's college fund as well. They were quietly withdrawing money from Darla's inheritance to pay for their lifestyle. Darla thought her new car and her new phone were gifts of love. The documents in that brown folder proved that they were just buying her things using her own future money. The look of betrayal on Darla's face must have been absolutely devastating. In one single morning, over a bowl of cereal, her entire reality collapsed. The realization that she was not actually the golden child must have hit her like a freight train. She was just a pawn. She was a tool, just like I was, kept comfortable and spoiled so she would never ask questions, used to keep the two of us from ever comparing notes. And then, I could imagine my father. Harlan would have walked into the kitchen, wearing his weekend robe, expecting his morning coffee. He would have seen Darla holding the trust fund documents, her face pale, tears streaming down her cheeks. I could imagine his face turning from a deep, angry red to completely ghost white as he looked at the pages spread across the table. He would have realized instantly that this was not just an angry note from a frustrated daughter. This was not a tantrum. This was a prosecution. This was a perfectly organized, mathematical execution of his entire facade. That is why he was panicking. That is why the hook for my story that morning was his frantic, desperate phone calls. My old cell phone, the one I had purposely left sitting on the kitchen counter next to the microwave, was probably buzzing incessantly. He was likely calling every single relative in his contact list. He would be trying to spin the story before anyone else saw the documents. He would be trying to paint me as the ungrateful, unstable daughter who was making up lies. But then, sitting there in Aunt Marlene's kitchen, drinking my coffee, I decided to do something they would absolutely never expect. I was not going to hide in the city. I was not going to let him control the narrative in that house. Aunt Marlene, I said, setting my coffee mug down. I need you to drive me back there. I need to get my phone, and I need to look him in the eye. Aunt Marlene smiled. It was a fierce, proud smile. She stood up, grabbed her car keys from the hook by the door, and nodded. Let us go finish this, she said. The drive back to the suburbs took 45 minutes. The sky was completely clear now, a bright, piercing blue. I watched the familiar houses pass by through the passenger window. I did not feel anxious. I felt completely grounded. Aunt Marlene pulled her car up to the curb, parking directly behind the silver sedan with the red bow that was now starting to droop. We walked up the front walkway side by side. I did not knock on the front door. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my old brass key, slid it into the lock, and turned it. I pushed the heavy white door open and stepped inside the hallway. Aunt Marlene stepped in right behind me, crossing her arms over her chest. The three of them were in the living room. They were frozen in a bizarre tableau of panic, anger, and accusation. My mother was sitting on the edge of the sofa, wringing a tissue in her hands, her makeup completely ruined by her tears. Darla was standing by the fireplace, clutching the trust fund documents to her chest, glaring at my father with a look of pure hatred. And my father, Harlan, was standing in the middle of the room. He looked completely disheveled. His hair was messy. He was holding his cell phone to his ear, pacing back and forth. From the kitchen, I could hear my old phone buzzing incessantly on the granite counter. He was calling my phone from his own pocket, hoping I would pick up wherever I was hiding. When the front door clicked shut, all three of their heads snapped in our direction. Harlan lowered his phone. He saw me standing there, wearing my simple clothes, standing tall and straight. His face contorted wildly. For a split second, there was a flash of genuine relief, quickly followed by a dark, boiling fury. Loretta, he shouted, taking 2 heavy steps toward me. Thank God you finally came to your senses and came back. Now, you listen to me. You are going to stop this nonsense right now. You are going to sit down, and we are going to fix this misunderstanding before you ruin this family over a stupid laptop. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I held up my right hand, palm facing outward, stopping him in his tracks. I forgot something, I said. My voice was completely even. It did not shake. It was cold and solid. I walked right past him. I walked past my weeping mother. I walked past Darla, who was staring at me with wide, shocked eyes. I walked into the kitchen, picked up my old phone from the counter, and pressed the button on the side to turn it completely off. The buzzing finally stopped. The house fell into a heavy, suffocating silence. I walked back into the living room. I stopped about 4 feet away from my father. I looked him dead in the eye. I did not look away. The numbers do not lie, Dad, I said clearly, letting the words echo in the large room. You sold my future for a phone. You stole my college fund for your country club. And you were starting to steal hers, too. You cannot lecture your way out of mathematics. His face turned purple. He opened his mouth to scream at me, to tell me to get out of his house again. But right on cue, as if summoned by the absolute truth of my words, the front doorbell rang. It was a loud, sharp chime that made my mother jump in her seat. Nobody moved. My father just stared at the wooden door. "I will get it," I said calmly. I turned around, walked to the front door, and opened it wide. Standing on the porch was my grandmother Esther. She was 78 years old, but she stood completely upright, leaning slightly on a polished wooden cane. Her silver hair was styled perfectly. She was wearing a tailored wool coat. Her face was set like solid granite. Her eyes were sharp and unforgiving. Standing right beside her was a tall man in a crisp, dark blue suit, holding a thick leather briefcase. It was Mr. Wallace, the family lawyer. Grandmother Esther looked at me. She did not smile, but her eyes softened for just a fraction of a second. She gave me a single, deeply respectful nod. It was the first time in my life she had ever looked at me as an equal. Then, she stepped past me into the hallway. Her heavy black shoes clicked sharply against the hardwood floor. Mr. Wallace followed closely behind her, pulling the door shut. My father stood frozen in the living room. His mouth fell open. "Mother," he stammered, taking a step back. "What are you doing here? You live 2 states away." Grandmother Esther stopped in the center of the room. Her icy gaze fell upon her son. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Frank," she said, using his legal first name. Her voice cut entirely through the heavy tension in the air. "Loretta was kind enough to send me an email last night. She provided me with a full, documented accounting of your management of the family trusts and the inheritance your father left behind." Harlan started to sweat. He held his hands out, palms up. "Mother, please," he pleaded, his booming voice suddenly sounding very small and weak. "It is a misunderstanding. The girl is upset about a computer. She is making things up." Grandmother Esther struck the bottom of her wooden cane against the floor. A loud crack echoed in the room. "Do not insult my intelligence, Frank," she snapped. "I read the bank statements. I saw the receipts. I saw exactly what you did to her college fund. And I see exactly what you were preparing to do to Darla's inheritance. You have disgraced your father's name. You have stolen from your own children to maintain a facade of wealth." My mother let out another loud sob and buried her face in her hands. Darla just stood perfectly still, watching the scene unfold. As the primary trustee of this estate, Grandmother Esther continued, her voice echoing with absolute authority. "I am informing you that you are being removed from your position, effective immediately. Mr. Wallace here is carrying the official paperwork. He will handle the entire transition of power. You no longer have access to any of the accounts." Mr. Wallace opened his leather briefcase, pulled out a stack of legal documents, and placed them firmly on the coffee table. "Furthermore," Grandmother Esther said, staring directly into my father's panicked eyes, "we will be conducting a full, independent forensic audit of every single account you have touched over the last 10 years. Any and all misappropriated funds, every single dollar you stole from the college funds, will be returned to Loretta and Darla's accounts. We will liquidate your assets if we must. Do you understand me?" My father did not answer. He just stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled out of the water. He had absolutely no power left. He could not yell. He could not threaten to cut anyone off. He was completely trapped by the numbers. The power dynamic in the room had shifted so completely, it was almost silent. I stood near the doorway, next to Aunt Marlene. I felt a profound sense of peace wash over me. I had not needed to be rescued by a prince. I had not needed to scream and cry to be heard. I had simply done the math, gathered the evidence, and brought in the law to witness the truth I had already laid bare on the kitchen table. We left the house 10 minutes later. Grandmother Esther stayed behind with Mr. Wallace to force my father to sign the transition documents. I walked down the driveway, got into Aunt Marlene's car, and we drove back to the city. I felt lighter than air. Exactly 1 day later, my phone rang. It was Darla. She asked if we could meet. I agreed to meet her at a small, neutral coffee shop halfway between the suburbs and the city. When I walked in, the bell above the door chimed. I saw her sitting at a small table in the corner. She looked terrible. The glowing, perfect golden child looked completely small and broken. She was wearing a plain gray sweatshirt, and her eyes were red and swollen. I bought 2 cups of coffee and sat down across from her. I slid 1 cup across the wooden table. She wrapped her hands around the warm paper cup. She looked down at the table, twisting a white paper napkin nervously in her fingers. "I am so sorry, Loretta," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I swear to you, I never knew. I never knew he made you pay for my things. I never knew they took your money. I just thought. I do not know what I thought. I was stupid." I looked at my sister. I really looked at her. For the very first time in my entire life, I did not feel that familiar, sharp sting of resentment. I did not feel jealous of her. I did not hate her for the car, or the phone, or the hours my mother spent brushing her hair. Darla looked like a confused child caught in a bitter custody battle. She looked lost. I realized then that my parents had abused her, too. They just used a different method. They abused me with neglect and financial extortion. They abused her with extreme indulgence, keeping her ignorant and dependent, using her as an excuse to steal from both of us. I felt a quiet, profound sadness for both of us. We never had a chance to just be normal sisters. "It is not your fault, Darla," I said softly, and I truly meant every single word. She looked up at me, a tear rolling down her cheek. "How can you say that?" she asked. "Because it is the truth," I replied. "You were their trophy, and I was their bank account. We were just different kinds of tools to them. They used you to hurt me, and they used my money to spoil you. It was a game they played to keep us divided." She wiped her eyes with the torn napkin. "What do we do now?" she asked. I leaned forward, meeting her gaze squarely. "But from now on," I said firmly, "we tell each other the truth. No more secrets. No more letting them put us against each other. If we are going to be sisters, it starts with the truth." Darla nodded her head slowly. "Okay," she said softly. "Okay." It was a small moment. It was not a magical movie ending where we hugged and everything was instantly perfect. But it was the very first, shaky brick in a brand new foundation for our relationship. 1 full year later, on my 23rd birthday, my life looked absolutely nothing like I could have ever imagined when I was sitting in that campus library. I had graduated from college. The full audit of the family trusts had been completed. Mr. Wallace proved that my father had stolen over $40,000 in total from the college funds. Grandmother Esther forced my father to sell his beloved luxury boat and downgrade his own lifestyle to pay back every single cent into my account and Darla's account. With my graduation portfolio, I had easily secured that promotion I wanted. I was hired full-time at the marketing firm as a junior graphic designer. Earning a real salary changed everything for me. I finally had my own money, money that nobody could demand I hand over for groceries or gas. I used my first few paychecks to sign the lease on a beautiful, small apartment in the city, just 3 blocks away from Aunt Marlene. The apartment was tiny. The floors creaked, and the radiator hissed in the winter. But it was completely, entirely mine. My relationship with Darla was a massive work in progress. We were actually attending weekly therapy sessions together. We were slowly, painfully learning how to navigate the world as adult sisters without the toxic poison of our parents sitting between us. Darla had moved out of the colonial house, too. She got a part-time job as a receptionist and was learning how to budget her own money. It felt like attending the funeral of my old, miserable life, and watching something entirely new bloom from the dirt. My 23rd birthday party was a very small, quiet affair. I hosted it in my own apartment. I invited Aunt Marlene, Darla, and Grandmother Esther. I baked my own cake. I bought my own decorations. The food was modest, just simple sandwiches and a salad, but every single thing sitting on that table, I had paid for myself. There was a deep, unmatched pride in that. At the very end of the night, after we had eaten the cake and Darla was helping me wash the dishes in the small kitchen sink, Grandmother Esther asked me to sit down with her on the sofa. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a thick, manila envelope. She placed it in my hands. I opened the metal clasp and pulled out the thick, embossed paper inside. I read the words. It was a legal property deed. It was the deed to a small, beautiful cabin sitting in the mountains near a lake. It was a property that my grandfather had bought many, many years ago before he passed away. I looked up at her, completely shocked. "Grandmother, I cannot accept this," I stammered. "It is too much." She reached out and placed her warm, wrinkled hand over mine. She looked at me with those sharp, intelligent eyes. "This is not a gift, Loretta," she said, her voice softer than I had ever heard it. "The one he always said he was saving for the grandchild who understood the value of hard work. You proved that you understand exactly how the world works. You protected yourself, and you protected your sister." She squeezed my hand. "This cabin is a tool. Go build whatever you want with it. Go find your peace." Tonight, standing here telling you this story, I look back on that horrible, gut-wrenching birthday text message. My father took my laptop. He took my savings. He took my sense of security and my belief that parents are supposed to love you unconditionally. But looking back, I realize that he gave me something so much more valuable in return. He gave me my freedom. He thought he was punishing me. He thought he was cutting me off to teach me a lesson about obedience. But all he actually did was take a pair of heavy bolt cutters and sever the very last chain that held me attached to a life that was slowly, painfully killing me from the inside out. My story is not about the laptop I lost. It is not about the money that was stolen, or the birthday cake I never got to eat. It is about what I was finally, completely free to build once the toxic weight of that house was lifted off my shoulders. I built a career. I built a real relationship with my sister. I built a life where I am the one holding the pen, and I am the one writing my own ledger. Thank you so much for listening to my story. It has been a very long, difficult road, and sharing it with all of you truly helps me process the past. I have a final question for all of you watching. Have you ever had to set a hard, non-negotiable boundary with your own family in order to protect your own peace and sanity? Have you ever had to walk away to save yourself? Let me know your experience in the comments below. I read every single one of them. And if this story resonated with you, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories just like this one. It truly means the absolute world to me. See you in the next video.